Hello all, and welcome to Explained with Dylan. A couple weeks ago, there was a coup in Niger. So today, I'm going to explain all the effects of that coup, which could even have on you. Now you might be thinking, Dylan, why the heck would I care about a country in the middle of Africa with a population of 27,317,074 people? It doesn't matter to me. I'm way over here in North America. Why the heck would I care about a country in Africa that doesn't have that much to do with me whatsoever? And that is a valid point. I will say that, sure, it might not affect you directly that much, but there could be some vast consequences from this coup. It's been happening for at least a good 2,000 years. I don't know exactly how long, probably pretty much since the start of Homo sapiens, but for sure for at least 2,000 years. Countries always want to gain influence worldwide, which starts by gaining influence on foreign territories. Now, originally, obviously, back in the times of colonization, they just walk in and take over the whole place. Then it's theirs, and bam, they gain some influence. But eventually, especially in the 20th century, they kind of started to decide that maybe it would be slightly better if they didn't take it over. They just started doing it a bit more slyly. Especially during the Cold War, both Russia and the USA always wanted to output their type of government. They wanted to gain the most foreign influence, but not just for them, but for communism in the case of the Soviet Union, and for democracy in the case of the USA. So they would go around, and sometimes they would go to war with countries and try and install democracy. Sometimes they just fund them and sort of nudge them towards becoming a democracy. And vice versa with communism. A very famous example would be the war in Vietnam. Obviously, the Soviets were funding North Vietnam, but the US actually went to war to fight North Vietnam on the side of South Vietnam to try and install a democracy in Vietnam. They didn't want to lose Vietnam to communism. Now obviously that didn't work out for them, because they ended up losing that war and Vietnam became a communist country, to which it mostly is today. But there are many cases where they did end up installing a democracy. And there are many other cases, yes, where communism ended up rising. The Korean War would be another example here. This time, both sides eventually just stopped, and half of it, South Korea, became democracy, while the other half became a communist country. If they happened to have been fighting on other sides, today we'd be sitting in North Korea with an amazing democracy. Meanwhile, South Korea would have been maybe not as much of a dictatorship as North Korea, because that's unlikely, but it would probably still be something like Vietnam is today. Nowadays, the wars are less common. There still happens sometimes, such as the war in Iraq, but normally the major world powers, such as Russia, the US, and now China's joined into the mix as well, are usually just letting the lower countries let them do their thing, and then they try and slowly nudge them towards what they believe. China's been doing that quite a bit lately. Russia hasn't had a chance to do it quite as much, but China especially, all over Asia and Africa, especially with developing nations, then China has been funding them quite a bit, which makes them start to agree with China a bit more. And then if China tells them to go against USA, they probably will, because China's been funding them all this time. China's been helping them out, so they see China as their ally. And if China sees anyone as their enemy, then that country would also see them as their enemy. Meanwhile, the USA is not funding so much as just trying to install democracies, especially in Africa now. They seemingly have given up on a lot of Asia, but in Africa, they are still trying their hardest to create democracies. The problem with these democracies is they're not very stable. It's a country that's been ravished by instability for years. You can't just go and say, okay, we're going to start having elections and these are all going to go perfectly. Everyone's going to get along. They're all going to vote, and the majority vote is going to become the leader, and then the leader will rule for a certain amount of time, but after that certain amount of time, not too long, then the leader will step down and someone else will take his or her place. That is basically democracy in the most basic way possible. So they've done that in a lot of Africa, but it doesn't work most of the time. Because the fact of the matter is, people want power. If someone sees that they can take advantage of a country, which normally they can in these cases, then they do. Honestly, when you look at it, Russia would be an example of this. Because Russia was a democracy. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia became a democracy under Boris Yeltsin. It was fair, everything seemed to go well. But then Putin stepped in. And then he started to turn things slowly around. At first, it was just nothing. It didn't seem like much. But bit by bit, he started to push himself from a president to a dictator. And it hasn't fared so well today. Now he is just in full-on dictator status. Because countries need time to develop. It is very hard to create a democracy. It takes years and years and years. Nowadays, if you were to try and unravel the US democracy or Canada's democracy, it would be virtually impossible because it's so integrated. But a country that's just starting out, if they haven't been a democracy for at least, call it 25, even 50 years, even 100 years, honestly, then it's not that hard to unravel. You just need one person with a smart mind, but maybe not doing the right thing with it. So that was an extremely long and winding explanation to finally bring us back into Niger. Because that is exactly what Niger did. They have been ravished by instability for years. They're the poorest country in the world. They do not have any money whatsoever. The government doesn't have that much power in and of itself. But they said, hey, okay, we are going to try and create a democracy. So they elected a president. Now, I'm not going to say this president was perfect. He was slightly corrupt, and it wasn't the best. But you have to start somewhere. It's not going to be perfect at the start. It's going to take a couple presidents to finally slide into proper democracy. But that did not happen because the presidential guard decided in Niger that the president wasn't doing very well. So they decided to put him into jail and take power for themselves. This is not good. The president, as I said, wasn't perfect, but this is going into a full-on military coup, which is not a democracy. That is worse. If the people voted for someone, even if they don't seem perfect, then they still vote for them. You still should be the president. Now, next time, they can vote for someone else, but the military should not be stepping in and throwing that person out just based on a few people's opinions. Now, I'm not going to say the elections in Niger before were fair, because some people had way more power and plenty of people didn't even get to vote in the middle of the desert. It's kind of hard to pass your ballot. But regardless of that, it was still way more fair than a couple of guys going in and throwing out the president and saying they are in charge now. Niger is not the only country where this is the case. There have recently been military coups in Chad and Sudan to the east. And to the west, you've got Guinea, who has sort of slid back into democracy a bit more now. But then you've got Mali and Burkina Faso, neither of which are doing very well right now either. Now you're still probably wondering, okay, Dylan, we get it. It's not great in Niger right now. But I'm not in Niger. This is Canada, or wherever you're watching it from. But I'm assuming you are not currently watching this from Niger. If you are, good for you. I'm happy to see you, and I'd love to see your opinions in the comments. But there is a problem that ties into most of the world. You see, when USA loses a democracy, then other countries see to take advantage, such as our old friend Russia. Russia, and more specifically the Wagner Group, which is the group that actually tried to overthrow Putin briefly, but then decided not to do it, and then went to Belarus. That was a fun couple of hours there. Anyways, Russia and the Wagner Group have been trying to strike a deal now with Niger, which would turn them back into more of a dictatorship, and would also give Russia more foreign influence. The same thing as I described with China earlier. If Russia is supporting these countries, then they'll look to Russia, which means they're going against Russia's enemies. And if Russia sees USA as an enemy, which it does right now, then so will the other countries. And this is exactly what happened in Mali. Back 2 years ago, when they had their coup in 2021, then the Wagner Group, which was just starting to exist, it wasn't that prominent at the time, but mostly Putin, stepped in and started funding it. Started funding their new government, their new military dictatorship. And now they are a full-on ally of Russia's, because Russia helped them out. But it's not necessarily the help they want, because they are funding a dictatorship. The same thing has happened in Burkina Faso. And the West should be worried that this could happen in more and more countries in that region, because many of those countries are what I described earlier. They're technically a democracy, but they're still in its infancy stages. It is very easy to unravel a new democracy. So many of these countries, if one thing happens, one slight off step, then it could all come crashing down, and they are suddenly an ally of Russia's as well. So there is a cause for concern. Now, the Western Bloc nations, which is a group of nations in Western Africa, all around Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali, have said that they need the president back. They have said multiple times that if Niger does not reinstate its president, then they are going to go into Niger. They are going to invade it, take out the military, and put back in the president. Or at least a president. We don't know if it will be the exact same president. Now, they do have a cause for concern, because they are the countries I was describing earlier. If Russia managed to gain more of an influence in Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso, then it slowly starts to leak in across the board. What if it happens to Nigeria? What if it happens to Cote d'Ivoire? What if it happens to Liberia? Any of those countries in that region. It could be the exact same thing, with Russia slowly seeping its influence in, and eventually it turns into a military dictatorship as well. But those countries are not going to be invading Niger, because they just do not have the money, they don't have the resources, they can't go to war right now. And the military of Niger is going to fight back. Now, that military isn't very prominent, so if those nations united, then sure, they would win. But they would end up spending so much money in the process. That could be the cause of their own military coup, because they just spent so much money. Maybe they don't quite bankrupt the country, but they are a lot poorer than they started out. So honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen. I suspect Niger is in it for the long haul. I do not think that that president will be coming back as the leader, but I also cannot see any country invading it, because even though the US easily could, and it is the kind of thing they would do, I don't think Niger is a relevant enough country for them. Unless it started to seep more influence into a major country such as Nigeria, in which case the USA might have something to say about it. But for now, I suspect that Niger is going to be in a tough position for the next couple of years. And I also have to say that the other countries need to focus on staying strong. They cannot let their boundaries down. They need to stay democratic, or else Russia gains more of an influence on the region. But for now, thanks for watching.